the death of God, what the death of God meant, what he described and predicted was that the death of God meant the collapse of the highest unifying value. Okay, so it's become pretty evident to me that we literally perceive the world through a hierarchy of value, and we certainly organize our social communities inside a hierarchy of value, and there has to be something at the top to unite us. Now, it isn't obvious what should be at the top. In fact, it's so not obvious that we probably can only think about that in images. We're not philosophically astute enough to actually conceptualize it. And a lot of the religious enterprise is the attempt to conceptualize that thing at the top. Now, let's say it dies because it's God and it got too abstract. Mircea Eliade, the historian of religion, said that that happened many times in our history, that the top value got so abstract, it got disembodied, and people didn't know what it was anymore, how to act it out, or what it meant, and so it floated away, and then collapsed into competing claims about what should be the highest value. Well, let's say diversity, equity, compassion. Well, why shouldn't compassion be the highest value? Well, you know, that's a reasonable thing to argue about. I think there's some credibility in the claim that love should be the highest value, perhaps. There's truth and beauty, many other issues. Okay, so the highest value collapse, we're not united anymore. Well, then we're motivated to argue about what the highest value should be. And since it's about the highest value, now I have an idea, it's saving the environment, that's the highest value. Well, when you attack that, then you attack my claim to embody the highest ideal. And so you threaten me psychologically, because that's where I found some refuge and some ethical guidance. And so I'm not going to listen to your practical solutions either. And then I haven't examined what other motivations I might have. Like, well, this anti-capitalism issue, that's a terrible contamination for the environmentalist movement. So, because you're just not going to solve both of those problems at the same time. You want to dispense with capitalism, invent an entire new economic system, and save the planet. Okay.
Part of the problem is that they're not actually sincere about it. So they would suggest nature is the highest value. But when you say, okay, well, here's what you could do to save nature: fertilizer, irrigation, and tractors for poor countries, so they can take the pressure off the forests, which is where the gorillas and the nature is. Using oil rather than whale oil to save the whales, and using nuclear power and natural gas. No, they don't want to do any of those things. So there is a nihilism there in the sense that the goal is power itself.
No, there's also no such thing as nature. Like, think about that. It's like when you refer to France as an entity, as a person. So you're personifying it, or maybe you're deifying it to some degree. Well, that's what happens with nature. It's like, what, nature? What is that exactly? Well, everyone knows it's like an old growth forest or something. There's some vague set of images, but nature conceptualized in that manner is actually a deity of sorts, an unexamined deity, and who God only knows what it means. I mean, you look at what happened in Nazi Germany before the Nazis took power, because they were allied pretty tightly with certain kinds of environmentalist thinking. Purity, for example, very big pushback against invasive species, for example. It's quite interesting. It's like, well, there is this worship of whatever it is that nature signifies, and symbolically it signifies something like, well, the maternal as put against the patriarchal, so that's in there. The warm embrace of mother, that's all in that symbolic realm. There's a great book about that called The Great Mother by Eric Neumann. Best book ever written on that in the 1950s, an absolute classic. And it outlines the entire domain of symbolism of the positive feminine. And so you do see this religious struggle between those who are now advocates of the positive feminine and detractors of the negative masculine. But it's very unbalanced, you know, because there's a negative feminine and there's a positive masculine as well. So we're all tangled up in that. We don't understand it.
I mean, one of the interesting shifts that's occurred even in my own career as an environmentalist is that all of the stuff from like the ecotopia, the utopianism, the green utopianism, the renewal, I mean, the harmony with nature, the kind of we're all going to live in these small self-sustaining kind of anarchist communities, the Ewok village sort of picture, that's gone now. I mean, Greta Thunberg actively says that that's not, they literally will say now, we're just trying to prevent it from being as terrible. We're trying to make it less terrible. So the utopianism It's still there. I'm not saying it's totally gone. We certainly see with renewables, the picture of renewables is somehow harmonizing us with the natural world, but it's nothing like what it was in the 70s. Nothing like Earth Day was actually mostly positive. I have a lot of criticism of Earth Day, but it was a mostly positive picture. So what's striking to me is the disappearance of even that positive picture from apocalyptic environmentalism. I wouldn't have predicted that apocalyptic environmentalism could sustain itself with such a single polarity without this much more positive, romantic utopianism, which was really even there. It was there 15 years ago, 20 years ago, but it's somehow gone. So you don't get that picture from Greta Thunberg.
Yeah, well, depression can be all-consuming, you know. And you know, another thing Jung pointed out very blatantly, he said, well, what's really going to threaten us, he wrote about this in the 1950s, is unexamined psychic epidemics. And he meant psychological epidemics and their effect on the political structure, because he thought, well, we've become the most powerful force on the planet, and now our unrecognized psychological, what would you call them? Our illnesses is good enough. They're going to manifest themselves in all sorts of ways that are going to be extraordinarily dangerous given our